Another method you may choose to use is completing the square. I don't use this one very often unless absolutely necessary. I don't think it's the best way. I always factor if I can on questions that are not factorable. I use the quadratic formula, which we'll talk about in the next video. But sometimes it is helpful to be able to complete the square. We won't do it a ton in this class, but it's good to know. The first thing you would do is factor out a GCF if you can, because we always start with that. The next thing I do is isolate these two terms. So I want to get x squared minus 6x plus blank equals, and then essentially I'm subtracting 13 from each side. So I have negative 13 plus blank. And the important thing is the blank has to be the same on each side, which makes sense because you always did the same thing on each side. In order to find out the new c value, which is what goes in the blank, we're going to take b over 2 and square it. So in this case, b over 2 is negative 6 over 2, which reduces to negative 3. And when I square that, I get 9. So I took b, which is of course the value that has just x to the first, took half of that, and then I squared it to get 9. So I'm going to add 9 here, and I'm going to add 9 here. Now the purpose of completing the square is that all of this stuff on the left side is now a perfect square, which means when I factor it, it actually factors into, if you'll notice, numbers that multiply to 9 that add to negative 6 would be negative 3 and negative 3. So this is x minus 3 squared. And notice down here I said keep track of the b over 2 value because negative 3 is that number that I'm going to be using. On the right side, I get negative 13 plus 9, which is negative 4. And now I'm solving using the square root property, which is just to take the square root of each side, which gives me x plus 3 equals plus or minus the square root of negative 4 is 2i. So again, you can show that work if you want. We're taking the square root and square root. And this is negative 1 and 4, which is I and 2. So my answer, if I subtract 3, would be x equals negative 3 plus or minus 2i. And Alex, that would be negative 3 plus 2i, negative 3 minus 2i. So again, that's another method you can use. And I'd like for you to try that here. So press pause, try completing the square, then press play to check your work. Again, first thing I would do is say 2 can come out of everything. So x squared plus 10x minus 5. Actually, scratch that. I should amend those instructions. First thing I want to do is get the number to the other side. So I'm going to take 2x squared plus 20x plus blank equals, if I add 10 to each side, 10 plus blank. Because it's 0 plus 10, which is 10 plus blank. Now I'm going to take the 2 out. X squared plus 10x plus blank equals 10 plus, and I'm going to do something a little bit tricky here. Because there's a 2 here, whatever I put in the blank has to end up taken times 2 on each side. So if it's times 2 on this side, it's times 2 on this side. So again, I'm going to take my b value, which is 10. I'm going to divide it by 2 and square it. So that's 5, positive 5 squared, which is 25. So that number goes here and here. That leaves me with still the 2 on the outside. This is x squared. This factors into x positive 5, so x plus 5, quantity squared. On the right, I have 10 plus 2 times 5, which is 50. So I actually have 60 on the right side. I'm going to divide each side by 2. So I get x plus 5, quantity squared, equals 10 plus 50, which is 60, divided by 2, which is 30. And now I'm going to take the square root of each side. So I get x plus 5 equals plus or minus 30 numbers that would go into that. 4 does not, 9 does not, 16 does not, etc. So nothing really goes into it, so it's just plus or minus square root of 30. So my answer is negative 5, because I would subtract 5 from each side, plus or minus radical 30, which of course would be negative 5 plus radical 30 and negative 5 minus radical 30. Those would be my two solutions.